My beloved child. The room may look ordinary right now, but something inside you has already noticed the change. Perhaps it began this morning, when the light entered differently through the window. Perhaps it was the unusual silence between familiar sounds, or the sudden feeling that today was carrying more weight than a normal Friday should. You may have looked at the date July 10 and felt your thoughts pause for no clear reason. Not because something terrible is waiting for you, but because your heart recognizes a turning point before your mind understands what it means. Do not let the word horror frighten you. In this story, it is not a prediction of disaster. It is the name your fear has given to the unknown. And the unknown is approaching. For several days, you have carried a quiet tension beneath your normal routine. You have answered people, completed responsibilities, and smiled when required, yet part of you has remained somewhere else. You keep thinking about a decision you postponed, a conversation you avoided, or a truth you tried to place behind you. You told yourself that more time would make the answer easier. But this morning, time stopped feeling patient. There was a moment small enough that no one else would have noticed when you realized you could no longer continue in the same direction. Maybe it happened while holding a cup that had already gone cold. Maybe you saw a name on your screen and chose not to open the message. Maybe you stood near a doorway and suddenly remembered the version of yourself who once believed life would look completely different by now. That memory did not come to punish you. It came to wake you. Long ago, you made a promise to yourself. You promised that when the right moment arrived, you would be brave enough to choose peace over familiarity. You would stop calling emotional exhaustion loyalty. You would stop mistaking delay for wisdom. You would no longer shrink your dreams to fit inside places where your spirit had outgrown the walls. But promises made in private are easy to forget when life becomes loud. That is why this Friday feels different. There is someone around you who believes they understand your silence. They have watched you become quieter, more careful, and more difficult to read. They think your distance means you are giving up. What they do not know is that something stronger has been forming beneath that silence. You are not disappearing. You are preparing to become visible. Last night, while the world around you settled into darkness, you may have felt restless without knowing why. Your thoughts moved through old scenes like a projector turning on in an empty theater. You remembered words that were spoken carelessly. You remembered opportunities you rejected because you feared disappointing someone. You remembered the exact moment you started questioning your own instincts. And then another memory appeared. It was not painful. It was warm. You saw yourself at a younger age, standing somewhere open, perhaps beneath a wide sky, beside a road, near water, or in a place where possibility felt endless. That younger version of you did not know every answer, but they trusted life. They believed something meaningful was waiting ahead. You have not lost that person. You have only buried them beneath survival. Today, something begins removing the weight. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It begins through one honest realization: the situation you feared may not be the real danger. The real danger was becoming so accustomed to uncertainty that you stopped asking what you truly wanted. That realization changes the atmosphere. You start seeing details you ignored before. A sentence someone repeats too often. A promise that never becomes action. A door you assumed was locked, even though you never tried the handle. You notice how your body responds when certain choices are mentioned. One direction makes your chest tighten. Another brings a strange calm, even though it requires courage. Your body has been telling the truth before your thoughts were ready to hear it. There is no monster outside the door. The shadow is the life you know you must leave behind. This is where the story becomes more personal. A few weeks ago, something happened that seemed disappointing at the time. A plan failed. A person became distant. An opportunity slowed down. You may have interpreted it as rejection or bad timing. You questioned whether you had misunderstood everything. But what looked like a closed path was actually protection from arriving too early. Had everything happened when you demanded it, you would have entered the next chapter carrying an old fear that would have followed you into every new room. You needed time to see what you were still tolerating. You needed to recognize the difference between being chosen and being valued. You needed to understand that a beautiful opportunity can still become painful when accepted from a place of desperation. Now the timing is changing because you are changing. Something big is coming, but it is not coming to rescue you from your life. It is coming to meet the version of you who finally decides to participate in it. Before this day ends, you may encounter a moment that seems almost insignificant. Someone may ask an unexpected question. A message may arrive at the precise moment you were thinking of giving up. A familiar place may suddenly feel unfamiliar. You may overhear a sentence that touches the exact subject you have been avoiding. Pay attention, not because every coincidence is a supernatural sign, but because your awakened mind will notice what your distracted mind once missed. The moment will ask something of you. It will ask whether you are ready to stop choosing what keeps everyone comfortable and begin choosing what keeps you honest. For a few seconds, fear may rise. It may tell you to wait until Monday. It may tell you that Friday, July 10th, is not the right day to change anything. It may remind you of every mistake you have ever made and use those memories as evidence that you cannot trust yourself. But fear often becomes loudest when it senses it is losing control. You will be tempted to call that feeling horror. Yet beneath it, something else will be present. Relief. The kind of relief that arrives when a prisoner hears a key turning in the lock but has not yet seen who is opening the door. You have spent so much time preparing for what could go wrong that you have not prepared for what could finally go right. You know how to survive disappointment. You know how to continue when no one applauds. You know how to rebuild yourself quietly after life changes without permission. But are you prepared to receive? Are you prepared for someone to speak to you with clarity instead of confusion? Are you prepared for an opportunity that does not require you to betray your peace? Are you prepared to enter a season where your greatest challenge is not endurance, but trust? That is the hidden reason this day has felt heavy. Your heart is standing at the edge of a new experience, and it has no old map for what comes next. The biggest shift will not begin outside you. It will begin with a sentence you finally say, perhaps aloud, perhaps only to yourself. I cannot keep abandoning myself to avoid losing what was never secure. When that sentence becomes real, the old structure begins to shake. Not because your life is falling apart, but because it can no longer remain arranged around your fear. Someone may sense the change immediately. They may reach for the version of you who always explained, waited, forgave too quickly, or accepted incomplete answers. They may speak with urgency because your calmness will reveal that something has already changed. Listen carefully, but do not surrender your clarity. You are allowed to hear someone without handing them control of your decision. And this is where the mystery of July 10th begins to open. The event you were told to prepare for is not a disaster approaching from the outside. It is a revelation rising from within. The terrifying part is not what may happen to you. It is the possibility that you may finally understand how powerful your next choice truly is. Because somewhere nearby, a truth has already been uncovered. A person connected to your future has learned something about what you have endured in silence. They now understand why you pulled away, why you became cautious, and why certain promises no longer impress you. They had believed your distance meant indifference. But today, they discovered it was self-protection. That discovery has changed their next move. At this very moment, they are deciding whether to remain silent or step forward with the honesty you once wished they had shown. They know the window may not remain open forever. They know the person they are approaching is no longer willing to accept half-hearted words. And just before they make that decision, one final piece of information reaches them. Something about you that neither of you was supposed to learn yet. The information did not arrive as a dramatic confession. It came through an ordinary voice in an ordinary place, which made it impossible to dismiss. The person connected to your future had been standing near a window, half listening to a conversation that did not seem important at first. Rain had begun tapping lightly against the glass. A ceiling fan turned above them with a faint mechanical rhythm, pushing warm air around the room. Someone nearby mentioned your name without realizing how much power it carried. Then came the sentence that changed the shape of everything. You know they were protecting you, don't you? For several seconds, no one spoke. The person hearing those words felt the room narrow around them. They asked what that meant, trying to sound casual, but the question came out too quickly. The answer was not delivered with anger. That would have been easier. It was spoken with the quiet certainty of someone who had watched the truth unfold from a distance. You had not stepped back because you stopped caring. You stepped back because you discovered something that would have forced them to choose before they were ready. That was the first open loop to close. The distance between you was never empty. It was crowded with everything you refused to say. At the time, you believed silence was the least harmful choice. You saw the pressure surrounding them. You noticed how many people were depending on them, how fragile their confidence had become, and how easily one revelation could have destroyed the small stability they were trying to hold together. So you carried the uncomfortable knowledge alone. You let them misunderstand you because correcting them would have required exposing someone else. And that someone had once trusted you. The person listening near the window did not know this part. They had built an entirely different story in their mind. They believed you had turned cold. They told themselves you had become distracted by another life, another connection, another possibility. Pride helped them survive the uncertainty, but pride also made them cruel in private. There were nights when they blamed you for wounds you were quietly preventing. Now the memory of those nights returned with painful clarity. They remembered every delayed response they had taken personally. Every time you looked as though you wanted to speak but changed the subject. Every moment your smile disappeared when a certain name entered the conversation. The clues had always been there. They simply had not known how to read them. The person who revealed the truth continued slowly, almost reluctantly. You knew there was a plan being made without their knowledge. The words landed differently this time. This was no longer about feelings alone. A decision had been forming around the person connected to your future. Other people had been discussing where they should go, what they should accept, and which relationship would be most convenient for everyone involved. It had been presented as concern, but underneath the polite language was control. You had overheard enough to understand that their future was being arranged while they were still being told they were free. The discovery had placed you in an impossible position. Speaking immediately would have caused chaos. Remaining silent would have allowed the plan to continue. You chose a third path. You quietly disrupted the arrangement without revealing how much you knew. That was why a meeting had been cancelled at the last moment. That was why a document had not been signed. That was why someone suddenly changed their recommendation. The person you cared about believed those events were random. They were not. You had placed yourself between them and a choice they would have regretted for years. But protection has a cost when it must remain invisible. The people whose plan you interrupted began to watch you differently. Conversations stopped when you entered rooms. Invitations became less frequent. One person who had once treated you warmly started speaking to you with carefully disguised hostility. You understood the warning. Stay quiet, and perhaps you would be left alone. Tell the truth, and they would make sure the person you were trying to protect believed you were the problem. So you withdrew before they could use your closeness as a weapon. The person near the window lowered their eyes as the full picture began to form. Their first emotion was disbelief, but disbelief quickly gave way to shame. They remembered the final conversation between you, the one that ended too quickly because both of you were afraid of saying what mattered. They had asked, "Is this really what you want?" You had answered, "It is what needs to happen." For months, they heard only rejection in that sentence. Now they heard the sacrifice hidden inside it. The room became too small. They stepped outside without explaining themselves. The rain had strengthened, darkening the pavement and gathering in uneven pools beneath the streetlights. They stood beneath a narrow awning and searched for your name on their phone. Their thumb hovered above the screen. They had imagined contacting you many times, but those imagined conversations always placed them in control. They would speak calmly. They would demand clarity. They would make you explain why you left. Now they knew they had no right to begin with accusation. The first message they typed was too formal. They erased it. The second sounded like an apology designed to reduce their own guilt. They erased that too. The third contained only 4 words. Why didn't you tell me? They stared at the question and understood its unfairness before sending it. You had tried to tell them. Not through complete sentences, but through every warning they dismissed. Through your hesitation whenever they praised the people guiding them. Through the sudden seriousness in your voice when you asked whether the decision was truly theirs. They remembered laughing gently and saying, "You worry too much." That memory broke something open. They did not send the message. Instead, they called the person who had revealed the truth and asked the question they had been avoiding. How much did they risk? There was a long silence on the other end. Then came the answer. More than you know. This was the second revelation. Your silence had not merely cost you the relationship. It had threatened something you had spent years building. A recommendation connected to your work had disappeared. An opportunity you had been promised was quietly redirected. Your reputation had been questioned in rooms where you were not present to defend yourself. Nothing obvious enough to expose the people involved, but enough to slow your progress and make you doubt your own ability. You never told anyone because you did not want sympathy. You adjusted your plans. You worked longer. You pretended the loss did not matter. When people asked why you seemed tired, you blamed ordinary stress. But it was not ordinary. Each morning, you woke knowing you had paid a price for protecting someone who might never understand. And still, you did not regret preventing the plan. What you regretted was believing you had to disappear afterward. The person connected to your future heard this and felt an emotion deeper than remorse. They felt grief for the version of you they had never truly seen, the one who carried consequences quietly while everyone praised your strength. They suddenly understood why compliments sometimes made you uncomfortable. People admired how much you could endure without asking who kept placing burdens in your hands. That realization changed what they intended to do next. They no longer wanted only to speak to you. They wanted to correct what had been done. The difficulty was that correcting it would require confronting people whose approval had shaped much of their life. These were not strangers. They were relatives, mentors, and familiar voices that had always claimed to know what was best. To challenge them would mean questioning years of loyalty. For the first time, the person understood the position you had been placed in. You had chosen truth over belonging. Now they would have to decide whether they were capable of doing the same. They returned inside, rainwater clinging to their sleeves. The conversation had ended, but the person who revealed the secret was still there, gathering their things. "Tell me who started it," they said. The answer came without hesitation. A name was spoken. It was not the name they expected. The person behind the arrangement had always presented themselves as your supporter. They had defended you publicly, praised your character, and once encouraged the connection between you. Their kindness had been so consistent that neither of you thought to question it. But kindness had been camouflage. They wanted access to both sides. They learned what you feared, what the other person needed, and where the relationship was vulnerable. Then they began feeding each of you different versions of the same events. To you, they said the other person needed space. To the other person, they said you were preparing to leave. When you became suspicious, they accelerated the plan. That was the hidden architect of the separation. And on Friday, July 10th, their carefully controlled story began collapsing. The person connected to your future felt anger rise, sharp and immediate, but beneath the anger was a more difficult question. Why had this person wanted you apart? The answer was not jealousy in the simple sense. It was not secret romance or petty dislike. The motive reached into something older. Your connection had begun changing both of you in ways that threatened the roles others expected you to play. You became less willing to accept disrespect. The other person became less dependent on outside approval. Together, you asked questions that neither of you had asked alone. The people benefiting from your uncertainty noticed. The relationship was dangerous to them because it made both of you harder to control. That truth raised the stakes beyond reconciliation. This was no longer only about whether two people still cared for each other. It was about whether they would continue living inside a story written by someone else. The person connected to your future left the building and drove without a destination. The rain moved across the windshield in silver sheets. Traffic lights blurred red and amber against the wet road. They passed familiar streets but barely recognized them. At one intersection, they stopped beside a place the two of you had once visited together. The memory returned with startling detail. You had been sitting across from them, tracing the rim of a glass with one finger. There was music playing somewhere behind you, low enough that neither of you needed to raise your voice. You asked them a strange question. If everyone around you wanted one thing, but your heart knew something else, which would you trust? They had smiled and answered, "I'd find a way to keep everyone happy." You looked down for a moment. They thought you were disappointed by the answer. Now they understood that you had been afraid. You already knew the day would come when keeping everyone happy would require losing you. The light changed, but they remained still until the vehicle behind them sounded its horn. They drove on with tears they did not wipe away. By late afternoon, they had made a decision. They would not contact you with partial truth. They would not ask you to revisit the past while hiding behind uncertainty. Before speaking to you, they would confront the person responsible and gather proof of what had happened. It was the first mature choice they had made in the entire situation. But while they were preparing for that confrontation, you were facing a discovery of your own. A package had arrived. There was no return address. It had been left outside your door sometime after noon, protected from the rain beneath the edge of the roof. The box was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, with your name written by hand across the top. You recognized the handwriting. Not immediately, but slowly, the way one recognizes a voice heard in a dream. It belonged to someone you had not seen in years. Someone who had vanished before the situation began. You carried the package inside and placed it on the table. For several minutes, you did not open it. The tape was old and slightly yellowed, as though the parcel had been prepared long before it was delivered. Inside, beneath a folded piece of cloth, was a photograph. It showed three people standing together outside a building you had never visited. One was the person who had manipulated the separation. The second was the individual who had just revealed the truth. And the third person was someone whose connection to your life had always been explained as a coincidence. On the back of the photograph, a date had been written. It was from 7 years earlier. Below the date was one sentence. They knew you would meet long before you did. Your hands went cold. Until that moment, you believed the plan began when your relationship became serious. The photograph proved otherwise. Whatever had been arranged around you had started years before either of you understood what was happening. Then your phone rang. The name on the screen belonged to the person connected to your future. At the same instant, someone knocked 3 times at your door. You looked toward the entrance, still holding the photograph. The phone continued ringing. The knocking came again. And from the other side of the door, a familiar voice said your name and added 5 words that changed the meaning of everything. "Do not answer that call." The voice beyond the door did not sound frightened. It sounded certain. You looked from the phone in your hand to the photograph resting on the table. The ringing continued, steady and patient, while the silence inside the room seemed to stretch into something almost tangible. Every instinct urged you to act quickly, yet something deeper reminded you that not every urgent moment requires an immediate response. You took one slow breath. The phone stopped ringing. Only then did you walk toward the door. When you opened it, the person standing there looked older than you remembered, not because of age alone, but because of everything life had asked them to carry. Their eyes met yours with the quiet honesty of someone who had grown tired of hiding. "I owe you the truth," they said. Those words carried no dramatic performance, no attempt to excuse the past. They simply entered the room like light reaching places that had remained dark for far too long. You invited them inside. For a few moments, neither of you spoke. The photograph remained on the table between you. Finally, they nodded toward it. "Yes," they whispered. "It's real." The years you had spent wondering suddenly began arranging themselves into a story that finally made sense. They explained that long before your paths crossed with the person connected to your future, several lives had already become intertwined through choices, expectations, family pressures, and misunderstandings that kept growing with time. What began as good intentions slowly became control. People convinced themselves they knew what was best for everyone else. Instead of allowing hearts to choose freely, they tried to organize the future according to their own fears. No one believed they were creating pain. But fear, even when disguised as protection, often leaves the deepest scars. The visitor lowered their eyes. "I should have spoken years ago." You felt the weight of those words. Not because they erased what happened, but because they finally acknowledged it. For the first time, you realized something extraordinary. Healing does not always begin when someone apologizes. Sometimes it begins when you no longer need the apology to move forward. As that realization settled into your heart, your phone vibrated again. This time it was not a call. It was a message. The person connected to your future had written only one sentence. "I know enough now to stop blaming you." You stared at the screen. No dramatic declarations. No desperate promises. Just one honest sentence. And somehow it carried more healing than 1,000 emotional speeches ever could. Hours later, the two of you finally met. Not in the place where everything fell apart. Not surrounded by memories demanding attention. You met somewhere completely ordinary, a quiet path where the evening breeze moved gently through the trees while the last colors of sunset painted the sky. Neither of you rushed toward the other. Both of you had changed too much for that. When your eyes met, there was no need to explain every detail. The truth had already done what arguments never could. They looked at you with tears they no longer tried to hide. "I spent so much time believing you left because I wasn't enough." You smiled gently. "And I spent so much time believing protecting you meant losing you." Neither statement blamed the other. They simply honored the pain both of you had carried. For several moments, neither of you spoke again. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. Then came the question that had waited through the entire story. What happens now? You looked toward the fading horizon before answering. "Now we stop living according to yesterday's fear." Those words changed everything. You both understood that the future could not be rebuilt by pretending the past never happened. Trust would not return overnight. Some relationships around you would change. Some people would not understand the new boundaries you were about to establish. But neither of you feared that anymore. Because truth had finally replaced confusion. And truth, though sometimes slower than fear, always builds a stronger foundation. As the evening grew darker, something inside you became wonderfully clear. That something big that this Friday had been preparing you for was never a catastrophe. It was courage. The courage to release old assumptions. The courage to forgive without forgetting your worth. The courage to let honesty become stronger than fear. The courage to believe that what is truly meant to grow cannot remain trapped inside misunderstanding forever. That was the miracle hidden inside the mystery. Not that life suddenly became perfect, but that your heart became free enough to recognize the path that had been waiting for you all along. If this story has found you today, perhaps its purpose is not to predict your tomorrow, but to remind you of something your own heart may already know. You are stronger than the confusion you have survived. You are wiser than the disappointments you have carried. You are more deeply loved than your moments of loneliness have ever allowed you to believe. Whatever season you are walking through, may you find the courage to choose truth over fear, peace over panic, compassion over resentment, and hope over despair. May every closed door that protected you prepare you for the right one to open. May every unanswered question lead you toward deeper wisdom. May your heart remain gentle, your spirit remain resilient, and your steps be guided toward people who value honesty, kindness, and genuine love. And when life presents another unfamiliar road, may you remember that your greatest strength has never been avoiding uncertainty. It has always been your willingness to keep moving forward with faith, humility, and love. Thank you for sharing this fictional inspirational journey with me. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need a little hope today. Leave a comment below telling us what part of the story spoke to you the most, because your words may become the encouragement someone else has been searching for. Until our next story, may peace fill your heart, may hope brighten your path, and may every new day remind you that even after the longest night, the dawn always arrives.